Engineer Libiwa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I have one clarification. The flight path for Seletar Air Base is the same whether with ILS or without ILS. But from what we heard from the Malaysia Transport Minister, Anthony Loke, he kept saying that it will prevent the development of Pasir Gudang, especially the tall buildings. So I would like to ask whether the Minister, Anthony Loke, has different calculation or miscalculated, or is he, as what my residents put it, I quote, frying roti prata, unquote. Perhaps my favorite Minister for Transport, Mr. Kobun, one meeting with him, seek a clarification on this. Thank you.
As to whether he's frying roti prata. Okay. Minister.
I thank the member for her usual colorful allusions. What I will state is that Minister Kaur and Minister Loke are due to meet, hopefully by the end of this month. I do not want to engage in speculations as to the basis for his calculations and assumptions. I think it is best that both sides meet, set out the respective concerns, and find a constructive way forward.
Mr. Chris D'Souza.
Sir, Singaporeans consider the recent act by the Johor Chief Minister as an affront to Singapore's sovereign rights. Ultimately, we have to look at this emotive issue through coldly calculative lenses by taking deliberate steps to advance Singapore's interests, and our resolve to take such steps should not be underestimated. One solution is third-party arbitration. Of course, there are other routes. My question for the Minister is, what positive actions and active steps can Singaporeans do to protect and preserve our sovereign rights?
Well, first of all, our current actions are designed precisely to protect and to assert our sovereignty and our sovereign rights. The second point is that we do need more bilateral consultations. We do need negotiations to resolve these issues. I believe these issues are soluble, but it needs to be a frank, open, candid, sincere exchange of views. As for Singaporeans, I mentioned just now that foreign policy begins at home. The unity of purpose, the calm way in which Singaporeans have responded to this. Calmness does not mean passivity, but actually both countries, and I think especially the businessmen on both sides, are aware of how our economies are intertwined. And these sorts of disputes are unnecessary and unhelpful. So calmly, resolutely, firmly asserting our sovereignty and our rights, and then quietly taking appropriate actions is probably the wisest course at this point in time. I do not want to speculate as to other measures which we would have to consider at appropriate times.
Mr. Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just have one supplementary question for the Minister. From the bilateral talks and discussions, both official and non-official, does the Minister sense that the Malaysian government is sincere in resolving the various bilateral issues between the two countries on a win-win basis?
Thank you, Mr. Singh. It's a salient question, but actually more complicated than it sounds. First of all, we start on the basis that we're two sovereign nations. But we're two sovereign nations with a complicated history. And therefore, we must always expect problems to arise. We must never be surprised by problems. They will arise, and as I said just now, the only question is how we approach these problems. And as the point behind your question, the spirit behind our attempts to resolve this problem. Now, when you're dealing with foreign policy, I find it very useful to clearly separate in my mind national interests from personal ties and personal relationships. And let me explain. In the case of Singapore, our top paramount imperative is to protect our sovereignty and independence, our national interests. Second imperative, to abide by international law. Third imperative is to fully honor all agreements which we have solemnly entered into. Because after all, if you don't honor past agreements, what value do future agreements make? It is only after you settle these three things, right? National interests, international law, abiding with agreements, then the individuals, the ministers, the officials, the agencies come into it. And I'd like to share with you a discussion which I had with Minister Azmin last night. And we both concluded that it is important that ministers and officials take the attitude of trying to solve problems, not aggravate them, not make them worse. Specifically to your question, I think I can quite confidently state for the record that all my interactions with Minister Saifuddin and Minister Azmin, I found them to be sincere, constructive, helpful, and I believe both of them, and I hope they also reflect a larger body of opinion within Malaysia, understand that the long-term interests of Singapore and Malaysia is best secured by working together, resolving differences, expanding areas of collaboration, looking for new things that we can do. One point which I also discussed with Minister Azmin, who is, you know, in charge of economic affairs in Malaysia, I said, look, the world is changing in such a rapid manner. We need to focus on updating, upskilling, transforming our economies, and working together, and not be caught using unnecessary bandwidth, fighting unnecessary conflicts. So, sorry to give you a long answer, but my short answer to you is, as far as the two whom I've interacted the most intensively, the answer is yes. I do detect sincerity on their part. But never, never make the mistake of assuming that personal ties can be a replacement for national interests, international law, or complying with agreements. So we always aim for good interpersonal ties. We always talk about friendship between countries. But remember that friendship between countries is to advance national interests. You never compromise national interests in order to have better relations. So it's a discipline which I always maintain in all my relations with my counterparts. I'm pretty sure if you spoke to Minister Saifuddin or Minister Azmin, they would say something pretty much the same. And I do my best to make sure I'm never the cause, the source of a problem. I try to be helpful.
Mr. Vikram Nair.
Minister, I think I applaud Singapore's approach in taking a calm, sensible approach to the problems. But one of the things that causes me great concern is I think there have definitely been very constructive sounds coming out of our MFA. And after the meeting on the 8th, I think with Minister Saifuddin, there was a commitment to de-escalate. Yet less than 2 days after that, 5 vessels came into our waters. Shortly after that, the Johor Menteri Besar came in. So it may well be that ministers' counterparts are sincere, but does that reflect the entire Malaysian government? And if they're not able to properly control or represent the rest of the Malaysian government, what can Singapore do in the event we get further intrusions into our water or airspace? Obviously, one option is bilateral discussions, which we are doing. But if one side is being sincere and the other side is not, or is not able to follow through with actions, what can we do? We'll be grateful for Minister's thought. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in popular parlance, it's called good cop, bad cop. We don't play those sort of games. I cannot speak for Malaysia, but I can speak for Singapore. I always say the same thing to all my counterparts. Singapore does not have the luxury of saying different things to different people. In any case, we believe it is this reputation for consistency, constancy, that adds to our reputation for reliability and integrity. So that's the way we deal. Sometimes it may come across as we are boringly consistent, and we seem to studiously avoid chest thumping and other manifestations of nationalism. But I would submit that this is the appropriate posture for a small, tiny nation state like Singapore. Not that we are passive, not that we give in, but consistency. Now, specifically dealing with a counterpart or another country which may not obey the same conventions and rules. In the case of the recent intrusion by the Johor Menteri Besar, in fact, he did that the day after the bilateral meeting with Foreign Minister Saifuddin. And as I said just now, completely against the spirit of the meeting and against the spirit of the agreements. Could we just let it pass in the name of, well, we just had a successful meeting, we're getting along, let's not sour them? No, the answer is we cannot just let it pass. We had to take action. That's why we had to postpone the meeting. So my point is, do not take Singapore's consistency, and some would say even predictability, for granted. We will always take appropriate measures to safeguard our interests, and any country dealing with Singapore must not assume that it is cost-free to embark on any adventures or antics against us. There will be consequences. So it's, I hope members appreciate this fine line that I'm trying to follow. To be resolute, but to be calm, to quietly but clearly protect our interests. And it doesn't mean we do not have sharp elbows. And sometimes we have to do it, we will do so. But again, as I said, it's still early days, so let's see how this evolves. The other point I would make, especially for younger Singaporeans, is that the nature of the relationship between Malaysia and Singapore will always be unique and special. And we must never be surprised, both at the upside and the downside. It is, in psychological parlance, what you will call an emotionally labile relationship. We must not be caught surprised or flat-footed about it. I believe we shouldn't aggravate the emotional angst, but at the same time, we must also firmly protect our interests and to tell the other side that there will be consequences for actions that are taken against Singapore.
Mr. Ang Wei Neng.
Thank you, Speaker, sir. So I think Singaporeans treasure the relationship, a close relationship with Malaysians, and many Singapore companies employ Malaysians, and it's essential for us to do the business. And Singaporeans also love to go to Malaysia for sightseeing, to shop and dine. And last month, Mr. Shanmugam said that ICA officers have worked their guts out to clear the crowd at the causeway so that Singaporeans can pass through checkpoint better. So in the midst of all this sea and air dispute, what is the message they want to send to Singaporeans to help to manage this relationship better.
Maybe that's something which you should express rather than me.
Mr. Alex Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I add my voice to commend the firm but measured response so far, and Malaysia has certainly provided Singaporeans with a valuable national education lesson. However, among some Singaporeans there is confusion, because provocation after provocation, so far what we seem to be doing is every time something happens we say, don't do it again. We're firm about it, but then it happens again and we say, don't do it again. So I think a dozen of red lines may have been crossed. And to use the same popular parlance that Minister had used earlier, will there be a point in time that this good cop has to be a bit of a bad cop for our northern neighbours to understand clearer and beyond doubt that any further provocation will be met with an equal reaction on our part?
That is another very good question, which requires an answer. But I hope you also appreciate, as the Foreign Minister, by definition, there are some things which I cannot say, and I should not say. But I want to clear up this confusion that they are the ones who have the license to provoke, and that we respond, but without an equal and opposite response. Newton's third law in diplomacy. And let me try to address it then at several levels. The first level starts domestically, that we need to maintain unity of purpose, consensus, and a collective spirit to stand united. Because if that domestic consensus is eroded or broken, my words will carry no weight in any international negotiations. That's one. The second, maybe you should ask Minister Ng Eng Hen tomorrow, but I've already said, and I only had one sentence on the SAF, but to say total defense and our investment over decades in the SAF make a big difference. It makes a big difference, and there are some incidents which I cannot relate today, but simply knowing that we have a credible and strong SAF again makes diplomacy much easier. Third is, in the spirit of candidness, sincerity, and openness, we are trying to resolve these issues, because in fact the specific issues that have been raised, I can see a way forward to resolve all of them. And so long as there is a possibility, a probability of resolving it, then our current tack of making sure the situation remains calm and that we don't allow the situation to escalate out of hand into what I described just now as a downward spiral of measure and counter measures is still the appropriate thing to do. Fourth is, I've also said that despite our attempts to be constructive and to keep the avenue open for a negotiated settlement, our neighbors must not believe that they can take actions without impact, without consequences on themselves. So I'm not going to enumerate them now, but this concept that for every action you take, there are consequences, we will do so quietly, but effectively. It's the usual Singaporean way. So that's where we're at. Red lines are not something you draw lightly, and not something which you should pronounce publicly without having carefully thought through all the consequences and without communicating those considerations clearly and unambiguously to the person you're negotiating with on the other side. And I hope members of this House and Singaporeans will understand that some of these are best conducted behind the scenes, quietly, and that's why I do not believe in megaphone diplomacy.
Mr. Liang Eng Hua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier, the Minister mentioned about Singapore honouring our agreements. Indeed, Singapore more than honour agreements in many occasions. Yeah, just last week, when we supply additional 6 MGD of treated water to Johor State. And I want to ask the Minister whether do the Johor authorities appreciated what Singapore has done? And if not, then should we look at reviewing the terms again on how we supply treated water to Johor?
Minister Heng Swee Keat has just reminded me to tell you that this additional assistance is over and above the agreement. But you have brought up an important issue, water and the water agreement. I've stated our position several times in this House. To us, the 1962 water agreement is sacrosanct. Why is it sacrosanct? It's because this agreement was guaranteed by both governments. In the case of Malaysia at the federal level, and in our case at the Singapore level, at the point of independence, and remains one of the key appendices to our Declaration of Independence. That's why it is, in that sense, sacrosanct. But even beyond that, even beyond independence, it is a foundational principle of Singapore's operating system that we fully honor all agreements that we enter into. Now, specifically for water, apart from the issue of price of raw water and the price of treated water, which are stipulated in the agreement, the volume of water that Singapore is obliged to sell to Malaysia, in fact, is only 5 million gallons per day. Strictly speaking, 2% of 250 million gallons per day. 5. But you have quite rightly pointed out, actually, in practice, for quite some time, and in fact, if you ask Minister Masagos today, how much water are you supplying to Malaysia? He will tell you 16 million gallons per day. That is 11 million gallons per day more than what the water agreement provides for. Why do we do it? We do so out of goodwill. We do not do it because of an imposition from the water agreement. We do it out of goodwill. And also out of goodwill, we have also priced the additional treated water at 50 cents, which everyone knows is a subsidized price. So again, I just want to make these 2 points. We have been religiously observant of our obligations. Yes, we have done additional things out of goodwill. We hope this goodwill will be reciprocated.